the fact that technology is coming in and in theory making a lot of work actually easier, which the optimist in me says, wow, that's pretty cool, because you're going to be able to remove a lot of people from doing boring, mundane, repetitive work. The question is then, what do those people then do? Part of a strategy is knowing what your value proposition is in this fast changing world, as it would be for an organization. You have to articulate how you're going to add value in the world. With the right mindset, with the right strategy, you can find a place in the world where you can continue to add value.
Sure.
And you will be able to future-proof your career.
And joining us today to help everyone in the finance industry, particularly accountants, future-proof their careers, is none other than Chief People Officer at Milpark Education, Leon Gazet Du Chattelier.
CTRL.ALT.SUCCEED.
CTRL.ALT.SUCCEED is proudly brought to you by Milpark Education, redefining what online learning sounds like. Visit milpark.ac.za for more information.
Thank you again for joining us and welcome.
Thanks very much, Ayana. Good to be here, and looking forward to the conversation.
Is it possible to future-proof anyone's career?
Yes, anyone. I wouldn't say everyone's. At least my view of the world is that it's changing faster than ever. But there's a lot of things that are also staying the same. And so if we have both of those perspectives in mind, I'm definitely of the view that one can future-proof your career and the value you add in the world in the future.
Sure. Leon, congratulations. You recently did a TED Talk. Take us through some of the thoughts, primarily around the importance of the personal brand.
Yes.
That as a brand, I can contribute to the demise or the sustainability of my career.
Yeah, so not new ideas. I'm borrowing some ideas here from some people. When we sat down as a business, we wanted to think about strategy a bit differently. And we ended up tripping into Simon Sinek. He comes up, he's written a book called How, What, and Why. And he reframes how an organization needs to think about strategy. And so I've played on that, and it really comes with the 3 pillars of how, what, and why. And it's a nice mixture of sort of philosophical thinking around oneself and the value you can add in the world, and also sort of some practical thinking, because I think it's important to marry both of those worlds. You don't want to be overly practical, and you don't want to just be philosophical. So the 3 pillars of how, what, and why are quite a nice framework to use to craft a strategy for oneself. And I can go into the detail of each of those if it would be useful, but that's the overriding framework I used.
Leon, is there space for me.com in the reality of what the world of work looks like right now, particularly in the finance space, knowing very well that it is most vulnerable to the demand for technology and technological tools and solutions? Is there a space for me.com?
I think there is, because, if it comes to seeing yourself as someone that needs to go into the world and sustainably add value, and the more intentional you can be about your strategy to continue to do that, then I think, you're going to set yourself up to future-proof yourself. And in crafting that plan, you suddenly become an owner of your own destiny. It's not just a victim to the things happening around you, but you're now able to say, oh, I'm good at that, I'm bad at that, I can do this to address that, I can be that in that world. And articulating that strategy helps you start to think about, your unique value proposition and find where you fit in that fast changing world. Because I still think there is a room for everybody, but it's going to be more about unique value propositions that people bring to the table, less so about generic value propositions across big populations of people.
How do people in the finance sector manage reinventing themselves as individual versus the slow pace of change, from traditional to more modern within the sector?
Yeah, so there's a mixture of things there. I think going just to first principles, the thing you are most in control of is your own action. So it's got to be a mixture of the own action you taking and what you're in control of as an individual, operating within a broader context, whether that's an industry or profession. And then obviously it's being aware of to what extent that broader context is also changing. And on the one extreme, if the broader context isn't changing to the point that you think it should, then you've got to slowly remove yourself from that broader context. Let's look at any embedded sector. Typically, you'll have, let's say, financial services sector as a broad sector.
Yeah.
You will have businesses in that sector who are a bit more progressive in the way they think about offering financial services. And what's really important as an individual is to connect your personal view of the world and the way you think things need to change with the organization that you want to be a part of, and make sure those come together. And if you're part of an organization where you believe in the overall strategy of the organization and that connects into your individual strategy as a person, again, you're going to set yourself up for being more future-proof. On the other extreme, if you're as an individual, you feel like you're heading in a direction that's completely different to the organization you're a part of, that's going to become difficult over time. And you got to maybe have to look to reposition yourself, whether it's a different organization within the same industry or whether it's in a different industry altogether.
Sure.
But again, it comes to you're responsible to make that decision and to make that move.
Yeah.
And at least just need to be aware of all the moving parts that make part of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, the whole concept of building a career relies very heavily on stability, almost like a static stability. You know, you want some kind of predictability because you want to know that this is your trajectory, and anything that comes to disrupt that, you know, it's always a little bit uncomfortable. And yet we are in the era of disruption.
What often people get wrong is they think everything from the past was wrong and everything in the future is going to be a certain way.
Correct.
I think that's quite an unwise view of the world. I think there things were established for a certain reason, and if you want to be a part of changing something, you've got to look back and say it exists in this way for that reason, and really take the good from that and maybe rely on the good to some extent, and then incrementally shift the change over time. That also allows you to feel a bit more in charge of like the direction that things are taking. You will get the extremists who say, you know, the world of old is completely removed and now it's the world of new. But if you look at change historically, typically it happens over periods of time.
Sure.
And you have the view that things are going to change very quickly, but then realizing that it actually takes a long period of time for that to happen.
Yeah.
And so, I think accepting that change is happening, but also things are staying the same, balancing both perspectives, and then using that to kind of reassure yourself that it's definitely possible to remain relevant and future-proof one's career.
Sure.
But you can't be on either one extreme. You can't just think that things are going to stay the same and not adapt. And you can't also, I think, go forward and just say the world of old is gone completely and now it's the world of new, because that's also just very overwhelming and becomes hard to know what to do next.
True.
There needs to be like a sweet middle ground of learning from the past, thinking about the future, and then using that to inform your next steps and next direction. Unfortunately, the noise that we hear in the world is often about just change. But there is a lot of things staying the same, and sometimes it's not the obvious things, like, you know, human relationships will, in my opinion, remain important, even in a world of technology, and might even become more important. If that's a belief statement that resonates with you, then you can say, okay, how can I build off the fact that human relationships will remain important within my career as a finance professional?
Sure.
Am I good at relationship building? Am I good with connecting with people? If I'm not personally good, am I surrounding myself with people that are good? And so as a collective, that's something we can really still add value in the world.
Sure.
So look for those things that are going to stay the same or become more important over time. Accept the things that might change. Try and adapt to them if you can. Otherwise, just know that they're going to change. And and that's where articulating your strategy is really important, because part of a strategy is knowing what your value proposition is in this fast changing world, as it would be for an organization. You have to articulate how you're going to add value in the world, accepting that the world's changing. And that does require taking a risk. It's not going to be perfectly correct, but the thought process of coming up with that is really valuable. And again, that's going to inform the way you take action, the way you change and adapt. Because it changes the way you think. And it all starts with the way you think.
How is technology likely going to impact that?
The fact that technology is coming in and in theory making a lot of work actually easier. So it's removing the need to do boring, mundane, repetitive work. Which the optimist in me says, wow, that's pretty cool, because you're going to be able to remove a lot of people from doing boring, mundane, repetitive work. The question is then, what do those people then do?
Correct.
And I suppose that for an individual who's doing that at that point in time can be excited by the fact that they won't have to do that anymore, but then they got to be confronted with the reality of, well, what do I do? And I think that's where it comes down to understanding the specifics of the context and recognizing that there's this need to marry the technology and what it can do with the human touch, because a lot about the financial world, if you think about it, it's actually about trust. You can trust technology, but I think it's very hard to trust technology in isolation. And typically there needs to be some sort of association with humans, whether it's, you're getting advice from your financial planner. It's going to be very hard to just talk to a machine and put your life savings in the advice the machine's giving.
True.
At least I would find that quite hard. I would still like to have a conversation with a person at a point in time. If I'm producing accounting statements, even if it's gone through a very automated system, I'd like to know that there have been humans involved in overseeing that system, translating that information into information I can understand as an individual, which again, I think is very hard to automate and process. So like all of these systems, all of these industries that are changing, it's how do you bring together the humans and the technology at the same point in time to create a better experience, not only for the individuals doing that work, but also for the customers on the receiving end, receiving that service or product. The ultimate blend of human and technology. Yeah.
Somebody may argue, though, that, for example, in the case of robotics, that is the perfect fusion of technology and humans or human science.
Yeah.
It shouldn't really be difficult, listening to a robocall and investing your whole entire life savings there, because there's some human touch that has gone into developing that entire system.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's already been industries that have gone through this change. So if you look historically, I think this change is happening faster than it has before.
It is, yeah.
But the stats, I love the stats on two things. The one being, how many people were farmers, 100 years ago. I think the number off the top of my head, and I stand to be corrected, was 95% of America was involved in farming. I think less than 5% involved in farming now. And it's not to say there's not a lot of farming going on in America, but all those people have been repositioned into different industries that never exist, and that, to be honest, 100 years ago would have never been imagined. I often reflect on my love for coffee, and I sit and think how much money I spend on coffee every month.
Yeah.
And I walk into these stores and I've suddenly got all these choices of coffee, and there's the story of where the coffee came from and these different types of coffee, and then the machines that make the coffee. And I just sit with my grandfather, who no longer is alive, but say, I spend X amount on coffee, and I go to these shops now where I can choose the different beans. He would think I'm living in a crazy world. 100 years ago, I don't even know if he was drinking coffee. If he was, it was probably one type of coffee. It was probably Rick coffee. He had zero choice. And I was actually doing some research on the coffee industry a couple of weeks back. And, it's now, I think coffee and coffee beans are like the top 3 traded commodities in the world. And what that showed me again is just humans' ability to adapt and create different value propositions over time. And I do think that will continue to happen. Industries will be created. We will evolve, we'll adapt, we'll have different value proposition. And that's going to require people to be a part of that.
Sure.
Maybe not to the same extent as before, but I still think there'll be a need for people. That's not to dismiss the fact that it's going to be easy. And I think a lot of people are going to be left very uncomfortable and potentially without work. And I wish I could provide a quick solution for that. But I do believe, and again, focusing on finance professionals, with the right mindset, with the right strategy, you can find a place in the world where you can continue to add value.
Sure.
And you will be able to future-proof your career.
Leon, let's draw a picture of what the typical finance professional profile looks like. And perhaps share some insights around what the likely impact of technology will be in any of those elements at any given time.
Sure. Okay. So I'm conscious of stereotyping, but I suppose I am a finance professional. So I think the average finance professional is, what I will say, very intelligent. They have the ability to persevere through stuff that's hard. Like it's not easy to become a finance professional in South Africa. So they've done hard things, they've persevered through that, and they've now qualified. So they've got skills. They've got a good understanding of how business and the economy works, which is really important. That's on the pro side. I think on the downside, typically finance professionals are quite risk averse. Typically they don't like change. Somewhere in the middle, you get a mixture. Like you actually get finance professionals that are very relational. And I think even today, the more relational finance professionals are more successful. And what I mean by relational, again, that's a very broad term, but they have an ability to work in a team. They have ability to collaborate. They have an ability to lead people and inspire people, connect to people. And those are the people that end up actually being CEOs of organizations or sitting in as a CFO. They're not typically good in the numbers, but they've got to be able to do that as well as inspire and connect with people. So that's the stereotypical finance professional. What I will say then is, how does technology connect into that, and what does it replace or not?
Sure.
Again, I find it hard that it's going to replace the relational side. I think it can replace the more transactional elements of finance, but it's already done that and has been doing that for a number of years. If you look at it through the lens of running a business and the fact that finance professionals understand how business operate, that technology just becomes another tool to achieve a strategy that's been put in place for an organization. And as technology changes, the way we've used and adopted technology has also had to change. Obviously, AI is very topical at this point in time, but it comes down to what are the basics? Okay, AI now exists. Can we use AI in this organization or to improve the value proposition for my customer?
Sure.
And if we can do that, how does that look like and how does that play out? And obviously, those that are able to embrace that change and be able to increase the value proposition for their customers will create sustainable organizations. As individuals, those of you that can adopt that technology and increase your value proposition for your organization or for your customer, again, will future-proof themselves. But again, it's not only that now. You've still got to consider all the other elements that come into play in running an organization or in having a career. That's just one tool of many. Like you've still now got to have a way to, if you're heading up an organization, how do we have a good approach to change management? What's our approach to aligning on from a culture perspective? How are we thinking about strategy? What's our approach to raising finance and the right amount of finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all these other elements of business remain in play.
Yeah.
Technology has been there for a while. I think it's going to become more and more important. But if you, on the one extreme, adopt AI for AI's sake and not intentionally to try and achieve or support your strategy that was originally in place, you're going to also set yourself up for failure.
Leon, about 15, 20 years ago, the young financial or even business analyst, right? All you needed to do, you were given numbers, or at least you needed to search out the numbers, given numbers, analyze them, produce a problem statement or a business case, right? Or even a report.
Yeah.
Today, that is completely different. So what is required of a young entry-level business analyst is significantly different to what was required of them 20 years ago.
Yeah.
How then do we develop within the industry resistant individuals that are able to use the elements of their career in order to build value?
Yeah, so I think to your first statement that I don't necessarily 100% agree with. So I think it has changed, but a lot stayed the same. So again, I think as a young professional going through the system, educating yourself, know that the core principles of all this knowledge remains the same. And what I will say, it's still important for one to understand those core principles. Like if you want to be a business analyst, you need to understand the fundamentals of what it means to raise capital in the best way and most efficient way possible. Even though in practice, you might just be able to ask the AI to come up with a solution for you. I read an interesting article the other day that AI is not end-to-end of any process. And what that means is, what they said is that it's middle to middle.
Sure.
And on the input side and on the output side, which is the validation side, we still need a lot of human interaction. So even the ability for the human to come up and identify the fact that something needs to be done and the AI needs to be prompted to do that thing requires quite a lot of knowledge and skill. Like we throw around, you can just prompt the AI to do it. You know that for you to know what to prompt the AI to do, you have to have potentially a very broad amount of knowledge. And so that becomes really important. And the understanding of core principles become really important. And then once, let's say, the AI technology does the work on the output phase, to be able to validate that what's been done actually makes sense, is actually useful for someone, requires someone to be an expert in that domain of knowledge and to interrogate the integrity of what's being produced by the technology. And so I suppose what I'm reassuring people with is all these things, potentially the education system you're going through, there's still a lot there that remains relevant and important for you to understand. And do not bypass the importance of core foundational knowledge
Sure.
and deeply understanding it. Not just learning it to pass an assessment, deeply understanding it. If you can become an expert and understand that knowledge, there's still going to be an opportunity for you to add value in that end-to-end value chain, as I said, combined with technology.
Let's help the chartered accountant listening today. Let's help the accountant that's listening today.
Yeah.
If you had to put it in very clear terms, what would they need to do to future-proof their career?
Well, I think come up with a strategy, and I can each of those 3 levels. Let me start with the first one, which is what you do. And that's obvious. Like as an accountant, someone says, what do you do? I'm an accountant. But the accountants know that there's so much under that that accountants do. So then it's starting to understand in that broad domain of things that I do, what specifically do I want to do and where specifically am I going to be good? So it could be, if you think of a chartered accountant, are you going to be a financial manager? Are you going to go into investment management? Are you going to become a financial planner? Are you going to go into auditing? I mean, I don't want to bore you with all the subcategories of accounting.
Very interesting. Yeah.
But as your career unfolds, you realize, wow, there's all these different paths I can go down. And one thing you realize as you progress on a career, what often happens is you don't necessarily figure out exactly what you want to do, but you start to figure out what you don't want to do. And even if you start crossing off that list, like I definitely don't want to go down that route. And what that leaves me with these couple of options. Some people are really lucky where straight away they know specifically where they want to go. So I think identify the need that you need to be as specific as possible. I'm a chartered accountant, but I want to specifically add value in these domains. So that's kind of like the obvious thing, but a lot of people actually don't know that and they aren't actually able to articulate that, especially projecting 30 years ahead. So have that conversation with yourself. Start to explore what that looks like and articulate it. Write it down. What exactly am I going to do? The how you're going to do it is what differentiates you. Why is that? That's a bit harder. It requires you to start to deeply understand your unique value proposition in the world. What are your unique strengths? And how do you do that? Well, again, it's very hard as a young person, but as you progress through life, you build up self-awareness around your unique strengths and importantly, your unique weaknesses. What I've found is that a lot of, having interviewed a lot of CAs, they're not able to actually articulate that really well. But it takes time. Like you've got to sit down. It requires a lot of journeying, writing these things out. What is my unique value proposition to the professional world? Identify also your unique weaknesses. What I've often seen interviewing a lot of people aren't great at talking about what they're not good at. I often joke, like, it's a cliched question, like, what are some of your blind spots or weaknesses? I get some terrible answers. The most common one is I work too hard and I'm too hard on myself. So whenever I see that, I'm like,
how's that terrible? But how's that terrible?
You need to go deeper than that. You need to go deeper than that.
Yeah.
I want to find out you've really thought about this and you've revealed these things and you've got an appreciation for them. So that becomes how you start crafting your how, your unique, like how you're going to go about doing this thing differently to everyone else. And then your why becomes, and again, that's the more philosophical part. What's going to get you up in the morning when life becomes really hard, when things are changing fast? And you need to be able to, articulate your why and have that completely motivate you to keep the energy up, to keep adapting. Because if you don't have that why, your ability to have a mindset that requires you to change and evolve and adapt becomes diminished. Everyone's why is different. It could be, you want to become a billionaire. I mean, some people, that is their why, and they're willing to sacrifice anything to do it. Sometimes it's your family. Sometimes it's because you want to have an impact on a certain part of the world or a country or a certain industry, but you need to articulate that why and start piecing that together because, again, that gives you the energy to fill the other buckets of your how and your why. So I think I'm of the belief that if someone has a good strategy that they've spent the time crafting and understanding, it changes the way they think about themselves. It gives them a good appreciation for the value that they add, but also the skills they still need to develop to achieve that strategy that they're setting out to achieve. That's going to set them up for success, for future-proofing their careers. I wish I could provide a silver bullet that's going to future-proof everyone's careers, but there isn't one. It's unique to every individual. And if I had to sit down with 100 people and say, how are you going to future-proof your career? I'm probably going to come up with slightly different advice for all one of those 100 people, even if there are 100 chartered accountants. And so it's very hard for me to give one thing, but hopefully my framework at least is something to grab onto that people can run with.
The one question, though, and I think it's a risk-related question, is what happens if and when the context changes?
So you've got to, part of your framework could be that you're good at adapting to
Yep.
change. Like maybe that's a unique strength you have. But if it's a unique weakness, like if you identify that you're not particularly good at change, what have you got to do? You got to surround yourself
I
with people
don't
that are.
know. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And that goes to my point earlier of being more resilient in groups of people.
Sure.
So that could either be your colleagues or it could be the organization that you're a part of.
Mm.
So if I have a good understanding, like I don't mind change and I actually quite enjoy change and I get quite bored quite quickly if there isn't a lot of change, which has its own cost. But if I've identified that I'm not particularly good with things changing around me and I get quite uncomfortable and I like structure, in a fast changing world, you've got to recognize that actually could be a weakness. How do you counterbalance for weakness? Position yourself in an organization that is adapting to change quickly. Because guess what? You can still add value as someone who likes structure, who doesn't like a lot of change. You're going to counterbalance the me's of the world, which are pushing forward on the change front, saying, hey guys, we need a change. We need to do this. You can be the counterbalance. I think that's a bit too much change or a bit too quick, or I think we need the structure with that change. And so you can still add value, but you position yourself in a context that is adapting to change. Again, setting your chance up for success in terms of being resilient to the future. So I'm often surprised when I interview people and there's very few questions around the organization and how we're adapting to change.
Sure.
I'm always, because again, if you want to join a business, you want to make sure that they're aligning with your strategy. And if you've identified the fact that adapting to change is important and you're not good at it, well, guess what? That organization better be really good at it. They better have people there that are good at it. They've got to better have systems that are good at it. And bringing together your skills and their collection of people, again, sets you up for future-proofing yourself, I think, to a great extent.
When we had just entered the job market, the greatest misconception at the time was that you needed to be a straight A's student in order to, get the preferential possibility of actually being hired.
Yeah.
I think that perception still exists somewhat.
Yeah, I think maybe in some domains, I think there's more an appreciation for that these intangible skills that are often hard to quantify, hard to assess are as important. Now, I can't speak on behalf of every organization out there, but on average, having interacted with, corporate South Africa to the extent that I have, there's an appreciation for characteristics like perseverance, and like curiosity, like the ability to collaborate. And when you look at someone's set of marks, they don't necessarily represent that. So then what do organizations start doing? They're like, okay, well, how do I measure those things? And there has been, that's where you do psychometric tests, et cetera, that start to identify these characteristics to some extent. But I think what's also really useful, you have the ability to articulate those intangible skills that aren't represented in your marks and know that they are valuable. But you need to be able to articulate what those skills are, whether you think you're good at them or not. I find myself very curious. I love to employ people that are curious because I think it's a great trait. But being able to actually quantify to what extent you're good at being curious or is it useful or not depends on the person. But yeah, I think on average, there's an appreciation that those skills are as important as the marks. In an ideal candidate, maybe it's both.
And finally, Leon, is it safe to make my personal strategy known?
I think you should. I think the more known, the more you talk to people about it, the more you tell people about it, the better. Just as an organization, I think it's really useful for an organization to tell the world what their strategy is. Like, what are their belief statements? What do they stand for? What is the direction that they think things are going and how they're setting themselves up for success? Same could be for an individual. What are my belief statements? What's my unique value proposition? This is where I believe I can and want to add value in the future. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be on an Instagram post. It could be you just having conversations with people you trust around you, whether that's mentors, your family, your colleagues at work, whether it's your manager that you're currently reporting into and say, this is how I'm thinking about like my career strategy. And does that connect to, where you see me going in this organization? Because again, what's important to recognize that as soon as your strategy is going in a different direction to your team strategy or your organization strategy, the sooner you recognize that, the better. It doesn't mean the relationship needs to end straight away, but it's an appreciation for, I'm going off in this direction. I can see this is going there. How does that look for you? Is there a possibility to pull that closer together or not? Because if not, we maybe have to go our separate ways. But if
Sure.
it is, wow, cool, we can create this new role, there's this new department coming up, or yeah, we can reposition you over there. So yeah, that's how I would think about that.
Actually, very interesting, because I realize now that part of the reason why, the people that have stayed longer than they should have
Yeah.
in some of, in their jobs,
Mm.
it is because they realize that my personal strategy is going in the total opposite direction, but I'm just not ready.
Yeah.
Perhaps the industry's contracting, whatever the case may be, I'm just not ready to not be here.
Yeah.
And then, they fall into stagnation.
They could, yeah. And listen, sometimes it doesn't mean you could actively decide to not share with your business your strategy, but it's an intentional decision. Sometimes there's a realization that I know I'm not going to work here forever. I'm going to give it 3 good years. I'm going to add good value, but I know I'm going to move on. Whether you share that or not, it depends on the context. It depends on the culture of the organization. You got to layer that up quite cleverly. Just like any strategy, you got to be intentional. You got to be, once you've got your strategy, you got to translate that into action. And that now is like, okay, making those sort of decisions. Who do I tell the strategy to? When do I tell it? How much do I share or not? So the intentionality is key. There's no wrong or right answer. You in the moment have got to think about it, make a decision, and then move. But just indefinitely keeping quiet about it, I think wouldn't make any sense either.
Sure, it doesn't. It certainly doesn't future-proof your career.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Leon, for joining us here. Leon Gazet Du Chattelier is Chief People Officer at Milpark Education and has shared incredible insights on how to future-proof your career. Stay curious and keep learning.
CTRL.ALT.SUCCEED is proudly brought to you by Milpark Education, redefining what online learning sounds like. Visit milpark.ac.za for more information.